Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Witkowski, and I'm the Executive Director of 7,000 Languages. I'm honored to be here to talk about community-based language documentation and revitalization efforts and our approaches at 7,000 Languages. I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge that I am calling in today from the lands of the Tongva and the Alachemid people, what is today known as Southern California. And despite centuries of colonial violence, the Tongva and the Alachemid people are still here today, working diligently and passionately to restore and revitalize their languages. And I commit to learning from and supporting the ongoing efforts of the Tongva and the Alachemid people to preserve and revitalize their languages, in doing so contributing to a future that respects the inseparable bonds between land, language, and people. So I'm going to start just a little bit about talking about 7,000 Languages. And I want to start with our mission. We empower communities around the world to teach, learn, and sustain their endangered languages. So we're a nonprofit organization that does this work, and we primarily do our work through providing online language learning software tools. We provide it for free to communities around the world, as well as ongoing training and support and other sort of services and areas of support that are often needed when developing online language learning tools. I also want to acknowledge our language partners. These are just some of our current language partners. I want to acknowledge, their work and how much we as an organization have strengthened and grown due to their relationships with us and the trust that they place in us. It's really been a privilege to partner with all these organizations. And I also want to talk about our values. I'm going to go really quickly through our values, but I do think it's important, and hopefully this just promotes further discussion about how organizations really center themselves. What are their values, and then how do those values get infused in their practices? So for us, our key values are empowerment and ownership. We absolutely believe that Indigenous languages and those materials belong to the community of ancestors, speakers, and descendants of those languages. And so we seek to cooperatively develop resources for each community in order for them to self-determine the future of their language. We also value respect and collaboration, valuing the rights and the traditions of our community partners and truly respecting their leadership and their expertise. We also recognize the value and importance of every language for their communities, and we believe that every language strengthens community as a whole. And thus, every community deserves the opportunity to teach, learn, and sustain their language, regardless of where that language is used, who that language is used by, or how many people might use that language. And so thus, critical to our mission and how we operate, we believe that communities should all have access to technology that supports their language journeys in ways that reflect their cultural values. So we believe that the technology really should reflect, and it can be adjusted to truly fit a community's cultures, practices, and ways of knowing. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go. Really quickly, here's just our impact and some of the work that we've done since our organization was founded in 2016. We have published 73 free courses in 40 different Indigenous languages. We've reached over 22,000 language learners, and the languages have represented 13 different countries. That being said, our reach is really wide. So this little map was from data collected from this last year's fellowship program. This is a program where we identify individuals and provide them with resources. We had over 2,100 applicants from all of these countries highlighted here. So quickly, just to reiterate our program. The way we operate, our program, our resources are 100% free to communities. The community absolutely owns all of the language data and can copyright it. And that language data, both raw data as well as formatted data, can be exported for other projects, including other online language learning tools, including potential archives. And we provide, in a way, a database of sorts by making sure those courses are available for free on 7000.org. So I want to quickly just talk about some of the challenges, though, for communities in utilizing language revitalization technology. And then I'll talk about our approaches to this. So for some communities, there can be a real lack of community control in the development of the technology tool and the development of the technology resource. Often there's a complete cultural mismatch. A technology tool might not align with a cultural practice or a way of teaching the language, and therefore there's a real reduced effectiveness. This tool cannot meet the goals of the community. Our tool is guilty of that as well sometimes. Sometimes there can be a real over-reliance on written language, which is not always a feature that Indigenous communities want in their language learning practice. Oftentimes there's also an over-reliance on translation into English or another dominant language, and that's simply not the approach the community wants to take when sharing their language and culture. So we've made several changes to our technology tool. We've worked hand in hand with our communities to change the way our activities work, reduce the reliance on written language, reduce the reliance on English language or any other dominant language. Another risk or challenge or issue is certainly data ownership and sovereignty. For some technologists and some organizations, there is no control over the language materials, and that can be a real risk of harm, cultural harm for the communities. And language materials are sometimes copyrighted to the software company, or they're part of exclusivity agreements, so you can't use that same data in another tool. And then there can be a real reliance, I'll talk about that in the next bullet a bit more, a real reliance and dependency on technologists or technology companies in order to create and update language content. So that can prove to have real sustainability issues for the community. Maybe this contract is only as good as there is funding, and once that funding ends, there's no real way to continue to update and maintain these technology tools. Sometimes there's absolutely no way, no training, no back-end support for the community itself to independently and internally maintain or further develop materials. And sometimes there can be a real lack of community input and community ownership of the finished product and what it looks like and who can access it. We think this is a real challenge, and overcoming these challenges really requires a shift toward community-led participatory approaches in language revitalization. And so by addressing these accessibility barriers, reducing the dependency, and ensuring community control, we can actually create more sustainable and effective revitalization efforts. So 7,000 Languages, our approach is truly about empowering communities to take that control over their language revitalization and documentation and archiving efforts. And so by providing tailored resources, training, and ongoing support, we really help communities build the capacity to sustain and expand their own language initiatives independently. And so this approach not only addresses immediate language preservation needs, but also fosters that long-term sustainability and resilience. So here's just some of our programs. I'm going to talk about each one in depth next. Again, talking about community partnerships, which is our key program, the very first step is always to determine the community's goals. What are their goals for the language materials that we're setting out to create? Both from a linguistic perspective, what are the grammar elements, vocabulary items, but also from a cultural perspective. How do you want your language to be taught? Of course, we provide curriculum and development support as we go along that process. And we often find that we're sharing best practices, how to elicit these materials, how to collect high quality audio and video recording that can be used for multiple purposes, and how to edit those audio and video recordings as well. We provide all these trainings to our partners, as well as trainings on how to use the software and how to use the back end and how to actually develop resources. We hope that this encourages our partners to teach others, and so that these materials can be created in perpetuity. But also there's no timeline to our support. There is no end time to agreement where we won't work with a community anymore. If a community partner needs support, needs training, we're always here. We provide free trainings every couple of months, and many of our community partners return again and again to sort of strengthen their skill set. We also provide connection to other organizations that also can support the efforts of the community partners we have. We understand that we can't do everything. We have a very niche sort of space that we operate in, and we want to make sure that our partners have that accessibility to other experts and other organizations doing work in this space. I talked briefly about our fellowship program and the amount of applicants we had. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it is. So this is a 10-week program where we provide individuals with additional training, connection to experts, as well as financial compensation. These fellows not only learn from us and others that we bring in, but they learn from each other. And it culminates in the creation of a language learning course for each one of those fellows and close partnership with their communities. Finally, we are also working on a language technology tool called Language Root. This is going to be a mobile app that is hopefully coming out in the next year or two. Critically, we understood that an essential barrier to accessing language revitalization technology tools was either non-existent or expensive or unreliable internet access, and also inexpensive, unreliable, non-existent access to like computers and laptops. And so this means for a lot of communities, there is no way to ensure that these projects are community designed and community led. And so we've developed a mobile app where community members can create using just their mobile device, and it can be offline or online, can actually create language learning materials, can actually begin to document their language as well by taking images, videos, audio, all of those capabilities that smartphones already have. So I want to turn to Indigenous language rights and access, which is also a really critical issue in this space. We define that as the control over the collection, access, and use of data by the community that generates it. And that data is all encompassing all of the assets that go into language learning materials creation. Because we know there's some real risks. There's potential risk for commercial entities to use language data without communities' consent or benefit. We're hearing more and more stories about AI companies mining for Indigenous language data to strengthen their tool without communities even knowing that it's happening. And also, there's a real risk of cultural misappropriation. That's language being used inappropriately or an insensitive use of language, and it can truly lead to cultural harm. So we think it's critical to ensure ethical access and use of language materials. And that means community-centered protocols. That means actually working alongside communities to develop access protocols and develop tools or utilize tools within a software platform to collaboratively create with partners sort of the language rights and access protocols. Also, by having sort of open, transparent access to each organization's ownership rights and access policies and practices. So this is how we do our work at 7,000 Languages to truly support Indigenous data rights. Data ownership. By default, all of the materials created by our partners belong to our community partners. They are the property of those Indigenous communities. We never claim ownership of any data that is collected or produced. We also create tailor-made access controls. So using our software tool, we're able to establish custom ways in which communities can control who has access to which language and what language access public people have, or even within the community, language being available at only certain times of the year or only by certain people. And capacity building is another essential element of this. We provide training, resources, and education to help communities manage their own data. That includes archiving and connecting to archiving, cataloging their language data, and sharing those materials in ways that align with their cultural beliefs and protocols. So as we look towards the future, we really see the need for more collection and more collaboration, especially with archives and working alongside archives to truly benefit this work. So we think by strengthening our relationships with archives, we can also strengthen our programs, our community partnership and fellowship programs. We often hear that our partners need support in locating and utilizing materials held within archives. And then even when those materials are unearthed, they're often not approachable or usable for learners. And so there's a true desire to take those archival materials and put them in a language learning platform. And the reverse is true. We're often working with community partners that are doing language documentation work in an effort to create online language learning materials. And so we want to reduce the barriers of entry for those partners to have all of that language data housed in a secure archive, if that's part of their language plan. Again, I think by forging these strong connections, we're able to further reduce what can often feel like a maze of organizations doing different kinds of work. And so we think it's truly essential for like-minded organizations to collaborate with each other. All right, and that's it. That's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and learning a little bit more about our work at 7,000 Languages. Again, we're really eager to seek out connections and collaboration. So please feel free to email me. My email's right there, or just learn more about the work we're doing at 7,000.org. You can head over to 7,000.org/partner with us to learn a little bit more about our statement on Indigenous data sovereignty and read through our policy on data ownership, rights, and access. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.